Welcome to PMP Live. Andre Perry. Andre is a fellow in the Metropolitan Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. His research focuses on race and structural inequality, education, and economic inclusion. Prior to his work at Brookings, Perry has been a founding dean, professor, award-winning journalist, and activist in the field of education. Know Your Price establishes a new means of determining value of Black communities. The deliberate devaluation of Blacks and their communities, stemming from America's centuries-old history of slavery, racism, and other state-sanctioned policies like redlining, have tangible, far-reaching, and negative economic and social impacts. Rejecting policies shaped by flawed perspective, the book gives fresh insights on these impacts and provides a new value paradigm to limit them. Right before we get started, or you get started, Mr. Perry, first thing I would like to ask you is just how are you doing at this moment in time?
Well, this has been a very tough few days for all of us, I think. This past Sunday, Jacob Blake became the latest victim of state-sanctioned violence against Black Americans when he was shot 7 times in the back while his children watched on. And we know that it was done by the Kenosha, Wisconsin police officer. And while Blake survived this shooting, he's reportedly paralyzed, but there's been a lot of demonstrations, most notably the NBA, the National Basketball Association, just yesterday canceled or they forfeited a game and players decided not to play. Other leagues jumped in. So it's interesting you asked me that question. Today, I jumped in. You know, in basketball, when you grow up in the city, like I did, that you hear the phrase, who got next on the court every day? Who got next? Well, today, I essentially took a day off of work. I did my own personal strike because I wanted to put everything on pause. This was the only obligation that I said I would commit myself to, because it is a platform in which I can express my thoughts and views on structural inequality in this country. So I'm not doing well, but I do have the privilege of having information. I have a book, I have a platform, and I'm going to use it. The title of my book, Know Your Price, I usually end with this, but I'm going to begin because I think it really encapsulates how I'm feeling in this moment. The title of the book, Know Your Price, comes from my favorite play in the whole wide world by August Wilson. Many of you will know this play. It's Two Trains Running. In the play, the main character, Memphis, is about to have his property seized by the city of Pittsburgh. And the city of Pittsburgh offers Memphis $15,000 for his property, in which the main character, Memphis, says, no, I'm not selling my property for $15,000. I know my price. I got my price. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's a refrain that's stated throughout the play. I know my price. I got my price. There's another character, Hambone, who paints a fence in exchange for a ham. He paints the fence, but he never gets his ham. And throughout the play, he goes, give me my ham, give me my ham, give me my ham. But he never receives it. And we're not sure if he had mental illness before he made the deal to paint the fence, but eventually he goes crazy and dies. But there's actually a happy ending. I know the listeners are going, wow, that's pretty depressing, but there's actually a happy ending. The main character, Memphis, gets $35,000, well above his asking price. And it's assumed he's getting the market rate or the white rate. And the moral of the story, he gets $35,000, but the moral of the story is you better know you have worth. What I try to do with my book, Know Your Price, is give people the price to stand on. And during these times, we must take a stand that race and racism are not these neutral issues, that each and every one of us must take a stand. So I wanted to really have a book that gave people the information that gave them enough information to stand on. The anchor study for this book was a study on housing prices. Now, it's a very wonky topic, but I really tried to personalize it. When I go home every few months or so, I visit my family home, which is now boarded up. It's essentially worth $0. It's owned by the borough of Wilkinsburg, which is a small Black municipality surrounded by Pittsburgh on 3 sides. And it's worth so much more to me because as the story is told in the book, and as it was told to me, I was a woman by the name of Elsie Boyd made a deal with my maternal grandmother that I would live with Elsie Boyd, who I call Mom. My biological mother was poor. She was probably abused. My father was in and out of prison. He was addicted to heroin. And so that deal was made, and I lived with this woman, and my brothers lived with this woman. And along the way, till I graduated from high school, about a dozen or so other kids stayed at various durations. But I stayed until I graduated from high school. So this house means so much more to me. But when I go back, it's worth $0. It just stupefies me that it can't be worth less in that regard. And so I started measuring housing prices. And so I started looking at homes in metro areas, homes in neighborhoods, analyzing the price of those. And we know that when we found that homes in Black neighborhoods, where the share of the Black population is 50% or higher, homes in Black neighborhoods are priced less than homes in white neighborhoods, about half as much. But people will say that's because of education, that's because of crime, that's because of other issues that you can see. So and me and my colleagues at Jonathan Rothwell at Gallup and David Harshbarger at Brookings, we controlled for those issues. We controlled for crime, we controlled for education, we controlled for walkability and all those fancy Zillow metrics. And what we found after getting an apples to apples comparison between homes in equivalent homes in equivalent social circumstances, we found that homes in Black neighborhoods are underpriced by 23%, about $48,000 per home. Accumulatively, that's about $156 billion in lost equity. Now, $156 billion is a big number. It would have funded more than 8 million four-year degrees based on the average amount of a college education, a four-year education. It would have financed more than 4 million businesses based on the average amount Blacks use to start up their firms. It would have covered, now we're in the midst of the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, the 15th anniversary. It would have covered all of the damage caused by Hurricane Katrina. It would have replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan more than 3,000 times over. And that $156 billion is about twice as much as the burden of the opioid crisis. I bring that up because my father, who died in prison, who's murdered in prison, who had an overdose, I studied in this book where he lived. I analyzed the parts of Detroit where he grew up, the parts of Pittsburgh where he also was raised. And I found that he lived in areas that had significant housing devaluation. And so this narrative that he was a bad person, that he caused his own demise really doesn't hold up. That he was robbed of the resources needed to lift himself up. As I say all the time, which is on my t-shirt, there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. And so throughout this book, I show that there's a penalty for being Black, living in Black neighborhoods, and that we need to address those penalties, and we need to restore the value that's been extracted by racism. And I do this in electoral politics. I do this in housing, economic development, reproductive justice, education, and other areas. And so I do this in a very personal way. So I talk about my mother, I talk about my father, I talk about other family members and friends. I talk about my wife and my child in this context. It's a policy book, but it's really written in a very autobiographical style, memoir. It's part memoir. And so, but the goal is, again, to give people the information to stand on their price, to make a demand. And so when you asked how I'm feeling, that was a long-winded response to that. But I'm energized. I'm really ready to hit the streets. I'm ready to give people the information that will help spur a movement so that we won't continue to see the videos that constantly surface and the videos that do not. And so I'll leave it there, but I'm certainly sobered by this moment, but I'm energized nonetheless. Thank you. Are you coming back? I think there we go.
Yeah, I'm here, Mr. Perry. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. So is there any portion of your book that you wanted to highlight in particular at this time, or?
You know, I really did highlight one of the anchors of the book, and that's the housing devaluation. There was a recent New York Times article on this very issue that showed how Black homeowners hide the pictures in their home so that they can get a better appraisal. The comedian D.L. Hughley, who also is quoted in my book, had that same experience where he got his home appraised and it was so low that he couldn't believe it. Then he gets another appraisal and it's very different, it's higher. But many people, and folks will see this in my book, are doing things to attempt to erase or to scrub Blackness from their home or their property so that it can receive a better valuation. But the housing, you know, issue is certainly a substantive one, because most wealth is tied up, at least Black wealth, is tied up into our homes. And so it's just not enough to just own a home. You need it to be valued properly so you can then pass on that equity to your children. And so many of us are striving for the American dream, doing everything that we're told, but not reaping the benefits. And so I'm happy to be a part of a national conversation on this. And so things are really looking up. I wanted to actually share my screen quickly because there is one episode that I show in the book, and I have it in video. And so I'll share that with you. And it would be hilarious if the issue wasn't so poignant. Here we go. I'm going to play it right here. Now this gives you some context. I testified on the Hill to the Financial Services Committee with the appraisal lobby on the issue of appraisers and the price differences. So I talked about my research, and they had questions about discrimination in housing. Now, know that housing discrimination is widely cited. We know it exists. It's not a surprise that it's there. But I just want you to see what we're up against when we're talking about housing discrimination.
If you think Black people are being discriminated when their property is being appraised, would you kindly raise your hand? One person on the panel. If you think that, for fear that I'm not communicating well, if you think that Black people are not being discriminated against when their property is being appraised, if you think they're not being discriminated against, kindly raise your hand. Okay, hands now, we're getting some consternation, I see.
You know, it's an amazing exchange. And it went on for a while, so that's only a short clip.
Wow.
This idea that there's no discrimination when you're housing, I mean, that's just crazy. The appraisal industry is 93% white, 93% white. And we know that representation matters when you're talking about the subjective nature of anything, our backgrounds impact our views. And since the 1930s, I see you have Richard Rothstein's book in the background. Since the 1930s, when the Homeowner Loan Corporation drew red lines around Black neighborhoods, deeming them unworthy of home loans, low interest home loans. Not only did it prohibit Blacks from passing on wealth to their children, it set a horrible precedent of deeming Black people and Black communities too risky to invest in. And we see that today. Like, a lot of my research essentially shows that Black homes, Black women, in electoral politics, reproductive issues, all these different things, Black people are devalued. And it comes out in the research around those areas. And so, but for me, this is very personal. I am impacted by this. Like I said, my father, who was murdered in jail, I guarantee you that if he was a white person living in a white area of Detroit, his behavior probably would not be criminalized. He probably would have gone to better schools. He probably would have had greater opportunities to get clean. Instead of going to prison, he would have gone to a drug treatment facility. And instead of turning 28, he died in the morning, right a day before his 28th birthday.
Wow.
And so it's heartbreaking, but I'm constantly thinking how my life would have changed if we didn't see this denial of wealth and if Black lives were actually valued. So when I turn on the television and see these horrible events, I go, you know, this is my life. This is how I'm living. Blake, who is maybe paralyzed, we don't know for how long, if it's permanent or not. You know, that's going to impact how he raises his children, how much money he has. It's going to set his family back potentially. And so we've got to address this issue because it's happening to millions of people all across the country.
One thing I wanted to ask, and I know certainly with the information you have, everyone, I'm sure, can benefit from this information. But do you have a specific or a goal for who you would like your book to reach the most?
Oh yeah. My audience are people who live in Black majority cities or are adjacent to Black majority neighborhoods. When I say Black majority places where the share of the Black population is greater than 50%, a lot of people say, oh, you're only talking to Black people. No, remember, there are white people who live in Black majority cities, there are Asian people, there are Latinos. In fact, in the Black majority cities, about more than 30% are other people. And so everyone's property is devalued when in these places. So we're all losing out because of the biases that we have of Black people and the assets that are proximate to them. So my audience is everyone who lives in a Black majority city, but it's also for people who are just interested in social justice issues. I provide concrete policy recommendations in the chapters, everything from expanding reproductive options for Black women and women in general, to investments in Black women in electoral politics, to low interest loans, for low income buyers, to tax credits for homeowners living in areas where there's significant housing devaluation. So I offer concrete policy solutions to a lot of the problems that we see around devaluation. And so I think that if you're interested in policy, if you're interested in Black issues and issues around injustice, this is the book for you.
Okay. It's interesting you mentioned that you have specific policy recommendations, because I guess what I'm wondering is to correct this issue, do you think that this is something that, obviously, as you have discussed, policy has caused a lot of this, but do you think that the remedy rooted in policy, or do you think we need to do something more or outside of policy?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. And that for me is to counter the dominant narrative that is the condition of Black cities and Black institutions are a direct result of the people in them. And we know that sort of, that's not the case, because between redlining, a biased criminal justice system, even as recent as the PPP loan, as far as the CARE Act, Black businesses not getting their fair share. We know that many of these issues are caused by policy. Yet when we say something's wrong, we point to individual behavior. We'll talk about character. I can't remember, but I do believe it was Lindsey Graham who questioned why Blake resisted arrest. And it's like, I don't care what you don't shoot a person 7 times in the back in front of their kids for any reason. I mean, you just don't do that. But it's the practice that should be questioned. It's that, those are the things that should be the question. Not the people, but we always reflexively go, well, what did the Black person do to cause this? And, that's just insane. That's just insane. And so we've got to stop that dominant narrative and stand up to and look for the policies that are robbing Black people of the resources we need to thrive like everyone else. I'm not asking, for any kind of special treatment. I'm saying, hey, if the American dream is real, you need a level playing field. And policy has purposely devalued Black people so that the country did not have to distribute resources equitably. And so we've got to change that landscape, that bumpy landscape of unequal policy, if we want to see the kind of economic and social mobility among Black people that we should be seeing, but we're not. And so for me, this is about addressing policy, not about blaming Black people.
Yeah, I think something you said just reminded me of something I heard Adam Clayton Powell say before, where he was saying that we, of course, referencing Black people, he said, we don't want any more than you have, but we don't want to accept any less than you have. So just to your point of, it's not about being placed ahead of you, it's just being given equal footing. You know?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in some ways, I recently got some people might go, I don't know if that's a good thing, but I recently got a very positive review of the book in the American Conservative, and people were shocked by it. And I said, well, this is not some super progressive ask to demand that we have a level playing field. This is this basic sort of American values.
Yeah.
And so for me, this is not a stretch, and this is very solvable. I mean, we can eradicate the policies of the past, and certainly I do believe we must consider race when looking at these issues. I actually was in conversation with someone today who said, why do we have to continuously talk about race? Isn't race just a social construction? I was like, well, social constructions are actually very impactful, but don't abdicate your responsibility for dealing with the injustices against those folks who have been deemed Black by racism, by the way.
Right.
So for me, again, this goes back to policy. We've got to address the policies that throttle economic and social mobility among Black residents and brown residents.
Understood that. Also, I was thinking of, you mentioned the book here. I have behind me Color of Law, and that goes back to, like you said, the 50s, 30s, but even goes back further beyond that.
Yeah.
Just the following Civil War, the Homestead Act, where literally land was given away by the hectare for free, and they taught people how to farm it. That was in a lot of cases like the first instance of the denial of Black people of getting this footing, and then they had to come back with a second Homestead Act, and still there was
Yeah. And let's be clear, like, land has been taken from farmers, from other folks. I mean, that there's been an extraction of wealth of a constant extraction of wealth of Black America that has eroded the quality of life. And so what this book asks for, and it's very explicitly, is that we restore the value. So oftentimes I put a numerical value on the loss. And so then I say, hey, in order for us to have some semblance of justice, we need to restore that value. And that can come in the form of reparations. It can come in the form of, low interest loans. It can come in the form of baby bonds. It can come in a lot of different ways. It will have to. But ultimately, you got to cut that check, because this is what we're owed. This is not something that we want just because we've been injured. No, like, we're owed these goods.
Yeah, making whole. This isn't
exactly. And so again, I'm not asking for anything in this book that is out of bounds. I think it's well researched, empirically based, but I certainly talk about the stories behind the numbers. But again, this is about restoring the value that's been extracted by racism, but also giving the information so that folks can demand it. Because as you saw, there is no incentive for people in power to change. And that's the difficult part. It's like, you got to demand change. So as an aside, keep marching in these streets, keep the protests up, because we're not going to get policy change without it.
And a quick reminder, just for everyone involved, I see someone just did, but feel free to put any questions that you may have as a viewer in the Q&A box, and we'll make sure to bring those to the forefront. So that said, and good timing, that brings me to one. This is from Hannah, excuse me if I don't say this properly, Chismar. She says she's always disappointed to see liberals shouting Black Lives Matter until questions are raised about who's living in their neighborhoods and the resources that are given to the schools. Can you talk about why those topics are such a trigger? And also thank you for joining on the strike day.
Wow, yeah, I'm glad she brought that up because a lot of people know me from education. I was a longtime education professor at the University of New Orleans, and I actually ran 4 charter schools in New Orleans. And so I have a lot of experience in this issue. She is absolutely correct. Lots of white people will say, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. Let's increase, then we say, let's increase housing density in your neighborhood and let's have some low income housing in your neighborhood. And they go, not in my backyard, not in my backyard, real quick. And in addition, when we start talking about changing the funding formulas for schools, know that schools predominated by people of color get $23 billion less than their white counterparts, $23 billion less. Now, that's largely caused by the way we gerrymandered school districts to mirror our segregated housing communities. So the person is absolutely right. When it comes to racial justice issues, we're like Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. But when it comes to being your neighbor, Black lives don't matter anymore. It's like it goes away real quick. So yeah, so we all need to check ourselves. But I don't think it's just white liberals. I think it's a lot of people. No, middle class people. I will say that middle class, because
that's a good point. Yes, that's a great point.
There are lots of Black middle class folks who think poverty is some kind of contagious disease that you're
NIMBY still.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have to always check that. I mean, because the reality is that we should, in order to have a democracy, we should have an ability to live anywhere, because jobs are throughout the United States. The different types of neighborhoods where you have different needs being met. And so if you have limits to where you can live, you're really going to limit a democracy. So yeah, we got to knock that out, this idea that this not in my backyard stuff, because it's really hurting communities, particularly on the West Coast. If you're on the West Coast, you could be a teacher and not be able to live in the city in which you work. If you're a teacher in San Francisco and you're not married to someone with some kind of tech job where they're making a significant amount of money, you're going to find it difficult to find housing in that area. And so we've got to figure out ways to change this perception that working class people or even middle class people, their status is somehow going to rub off on you just because you are increasing density in the neighborhood. Come on, it just has to stop. It has to stop. But it's that devaluation. When you don't value people, you don't want them as neighbors. The difficult part is when it comes to Black folk, folks, companies will certainly use our labor, but they don't give us they don't want us to be their neighbors. And so that has to change. That just has to change.
Hearing you say that, it's like it ties into what you said earlier about, when you're talking about instances with the police and Black people, and then there's always a quick jump to, well, what was the person doing? As if that somehow justifies the outcome. But, the character, you're projecting like a character, a negative one, onto a person because you think somehow they deserve it because of the situation that they're in, which is beyond their control.
Absolutely. I mean, it doesn't, only in Black world does it make sense where a Black child, I'm talking about Tamir Rice, can carry a toy gun, a policeman's roll up, and shoot that child. Like, no, that just doesn't happen in white America, but it happens all the time in Black America. But those same attitudes held by the cop that killed Tamir Rice are held by business leaders, police officers, housing professionals, legislators, right? You know, it just shows up in different ways. In the appraisal community, it shows up in lower appraisals. For cops, it shows up in police shooting. In lending, it shows up in predatory lending. You know, but it's the same perception or negative perception of Black people that motivates these behaviors. And so we've got to, but you know, I'm not a shrink. I can't get in people's head, but I can get to policy. So my goal is to change policies to protect, to attempt to protect people. But I also know that we've got to change mindsets as well. So there's some of that in this book, but most of it is directed on how to change policy to prevent some of the tragedies that we're seeing every day.
Okay, so we have a few questions come in, pretty good ones. Go in reverse order, chronologically speaking. Here's one from Dawn. She says, Dr. Perry, given the policies have been in place for generations, how long do you think it might take to eradicate the effects? If you can do such a projection. Yeah. Well,
I mean, there's some things we can do tomorrow. Like we should be able to reduce the number of prison beds, for instance, in various states by 50% over the next 4 or 5 years. That can be done. We should be able to distribute business loans to Black business owners quickly, and if we truly have the will. There's some things we can do immediately. Now, closing the wealth gap, that's going to take some time, but we can close it significantly by canceling student debt, instituting some other form of wealth generation, like say baby bonds, where when you're born, you're given a savings account that accrues over time. We certainly can do the same things that got us out of the Depression. We can give low interest housing loans to people living in devalued areas. Because remember, there's a lot of homes in places like Detroit that banks won't give a mortgage because they're just valued so low. And so we need new loan products. And by the way, I want people to know that I'm working with this Ashoka organization. I'm actually going to have a $1 million challenge where we're giving away $1 million in prize money, where we're asking people to give their solutions to housing devaluation. So look, follow me, and we'll be announcing something in September about this competition. So look for that. But there are things that we can do that will certainly close the wealth gap, maybe not close it completely, but there are things that we can do tomorrow if we elect the right people, if we invest in the right things. We can see growth immediately.
Okay, so
we can certainly stop shooting people in the back.
It might be a good place to start.
Yeah.
So here's another question. This one says, they know you're doing work with the Brookings Institute, and that includes the pandemic, COVID, and its effect on Black communities. They ask, are you able to address that, just the way the pandemic?
Yeah, obviously COVID is colorblind. There's no, it's not attracted to Black people. So COVID isn't racist, but our past policies have been. And so those conditions that the virus thrives in are the conditions that racism created among Black folks. So that's why you see Black people in many states with twice the rate of infection as their white counterparts. It's because we live in more dense housing, more substandard housing. We work in jobs that put us directly it exposes us directly to the virus. Know that most Black-owned businesses are in the area of healthcare. And so we're going to be exposed. And we are disproportionately in jobs that are considered essential. So we are the grocery store clerks. We are the bus drivers, and male men and women, mail carriers. So all of those things were created or influenced strongly by racist policies of the past. And so for me, a lot of my research on COVID shows, again, that structural racism is real, that it is the pre-existing condition that allows the virus to spread. And so again, my work on housing, my work on criminal justice and economic development seeks to eradicate those conditions so that when an inevitable crisis does occur, that we're not disproportionately impacted by it.
And since you just mentioned that, and I see you shared it earlier, for that contest you just referenced, you want people to follow you on your Twitter and your social media pages, your Twitter and your Instagram?
Yeah. If you follow me on Twitter, I'm probably going to post it at the top of there, but just follow me. There will be an announcement. Follow me at Brookings. There'll be an announcement. Follow Ashoka. But yeah, we're going to have a big announcement, and I'm excited about it because we're actually going to identify people who are proximate to the problem. So, you know, I love it. Typically at a think tank, we're the ones that are asked to come up with solutions. Right. But we're going to ground. We're saying that the solutions are out there. And so it's going to be an interesting partnership between Brookings and Ashoka because we're identifying the problem. We're providing research support for contestants, but we're looking for people on the ground working on these issues. And they're out there. I'm on this book tour, and inevitably there are people who raise their hand and say, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and they sound great. And I'm like, hey, we need to incentivize it. And so we'll be having $1 million of prize money to those ideas that are strong. So I'm excited about it because, again, we need to incentivize people doing this good work who are proximate to the problem, not folks who are distant or removed from it.
Yeah, I'd say $1 million is a good incentive.
Yeah, exactly. You know, money talks in this country, certainly.
Yeah, and that's you know, that's what the root of what we're discussing now.
That's exactly right. Know your price.
Yeah, there you go.
Know your price. Get the book. Order it now.
Okay.
From Politics and Prose.
There you go. Oh, not to mention
Politics and Prose.
Again, we have more time. If anyone wants to put any questions in, feel free to ask away because this is your opportunity. You may not be able to reach Mr. Perry directly on social media for your Q&A too often. Let me ask you this. Now, this is kind of a slight departure from what we've been discussing, but something that we've asked of everyone we host in this format. Is there anything you're currently reading?
Oh, man, let me tell you. You know, this book right here, Mersha, I blank on her name. Mersha Badaran. She is tremendous, tremendous book right here, The Color of Money, Black Banks and the Racial Wealth Gap. So I've been on this racial wealth gap, and you know, that's actually my second time reading because I wanted to relearn something. It's phenomenal book, phenomenal book. It really informed my thinking on a lot of different things. You mentioned The Color of Money. There's other great books that I'm reading, and you know, this might seem, and also this book by mentor James Lowry, Change Agent. Get this one too. Just his stories on creating wealth for minorities, and so he's a great leader, great change agent. So I'm reading that as well. So I'm really on to this wealth, closing the wealth gap right now. That's what I'm on. But that means removing the drags of racism from it, because it's not just enough to invest in assets. It's also, you have to remove the drags that limits the return on those investments. So we got to do that too. We don't do that enough. We're constantly talking about investment. But if you invest and don't remove the drags, you can actually widen wealth gaps depending on how you're investing. So yeah, so we need to remove these drags of racism and sexism in the market so that assets that are proximate to Black people can grow appropriately.
That's why and this is just me individually, I've always had slight issue just with the market. People talk about the market in general, about how the market is just
the invisible hand.
Yeah, it's like, but it's made up of actors, and these people have their own biases and prejudices. So how invisible is this hand? You know, it doesn't seem so invisible to me.
Yeah, and when we it's funny, we blame the choices of Black people all the time, but we don't blame the choices of policymakers.
Yeah,
you know, that actually take, their problems are done at scale. You know, like at so.
Proportion matters.
There's an interesting question. You say the solution is policy. What can individuals not directly involved in policy do to make change in addition to voting? You know, so I brought this up. I you know, in terms of protest, I really do believe you need to be in these streets. That nothing, at least in terms of civil rights, in terms of Black liberation, any semblance of it, all of that had occurred because somebody was marching in the streets demanding change. And so I would say be a part of the movement, but that requires joining something. Now you certainly can join one of the historic civil rights organizations, NAACP, Urban League, others, or you can join new organizations, Movement for Black Lives, other organizations focused on racial equity. But now the time is to join something. And because when you do, when the streets are talking, Dave Chappelle, I loved how he said the streets are talking in his latest special. When the streets talk, it gives me the ammunition to press for policy, because policymakers then come to me and say, what are the solutions? What are the answers? But if there's no demand, folks aren't looking for me. Folks aren't checking for me. So I need folks to get in the street and socially distance, wearing a mask.
Yeah,
you know, still, you know, take all the necessary precautions, but get in the street. You know, carry your books in the street. You can do that. You can read a little bit while you protest. Always good.
Multitask.
Yeah, always bring a book somewhere so you can get some of your reading in. I believe in reading every day, like it is exercise. So for me, join something and get out in the streets. If you're not connected to policy, get informed by it, but be a part of the demand for change.
Yeah, I don't, yeah, the perfect answer. I won't add to that. So here we have Jason Katz says, Dr. Perry, I thought your book was tremendous, and thank you for taking the time to offer your insight today. Now, this is more so, they want to know if you can speak to the effect that COVID, the pandemic, is having specifically on the workforce of teachers, especially in these underserved communities.
You know, I have actually a chapter, entire chapter on, not on COVID, but teachers in New Orleans. And one of the things that happened after Hurricane Katrina, we saw a spike in retirements after Hurricane Katrina. I predict, and you're already seeing this, particularly among teachers 55 and older, folks are going to retire. Not only because one, the workforce demands have changed, a lot of online learning, many teachers who are in-person classroom, they're just not satisfied with the online format. Mm-hmm. It takes a type of teacher. It's a type of teaching that requires its own level of expertise and appreciation. But I certainly predict there's going to be a significant number of retirements among teachers over the next few years. And it's a shame. That's why states have to, governors have to demand that the federal government funds the states appropriately so that schools can have the PPE, so they can be able to socially distance on buses and provide the computers and the Wi-Fi to their students. Because if we don't, you're talking years off of students' educational lives, and you could see a widening of educational disparity along the lines of race and class. Because again, remember I shared that schools predominated by people of color receive $23 billion less in revenue. And so those districts are already those schools are already behind their counterparts. So we really desperately need the federal government to come through, but we also need to pay attention to look after our more senior teachers, to encourage them to stick through this, because we desperately need our best teachers after this pandemic is waned. So
yeah, I wasn't even thinking about anything like the retirement wave. That's wow.
Yeah, that's coming. That's coming, and not just in education, in other fields as well. But it's really going to be felt in education, because we know that anyone can carry the virus. And so if you're in a district or a school that simply does not have the equipment or the resources to make all the necessary precautions, then you're essentially creating an incubator for the spread of the disease or the illness. So I don't blame people for saying I'm not going to teach if there's a risk of you getting sick, because of the consequences are just so severe.
Yeah. That's
how to reach out to the panelists. You can always reach out by following me on Twitter or IG at Andre Perry EDU. That's always key. Wow, what's the single race, wealth, equity book you've read that was most impactful for you?
Good question.
I would have to say one's a book and one's a report. One is a report by Sandy Darity and Derek Hamilton on, I can't remember, it's the myths around wealth. I'm forgetting the title of it, but check out, if you say Sandy Darity, Derek Hamilton, myths around wealth. incredible, and short, sweet report, great report. But then the color of law. I mean, it's an important volume. Just an important contribution.
Yeah.
And then I'll also throw in another non-book. I love the 1619 project. I think it is transformative. There will be some books that come out of that, but it's just a tremendous effort to reframe the conversation on our founding. And I can't say how much I really appreciate that effort.
It's getting close here.
It's coming close to time.
You're right. So I'm going to first, once again, just put the link into the chat for everyone. If you haven't already, I know you're motivated to now to go purchase Know Your Price. The link is in the chat. It takes you directly to PNP's website to make the purchase, which of course helps us, PNP, to continue to provide these formats. Well, we've already discussed your books. Before we do go, is there anything else that you haven't had the chance to say that you would like to say or share? Because this is your platform.
I think this is a very difficult time for all of us. I want us to be engaged and not shy away from these issues. I know it's difficult to have conversations around white supremacy and structural racism and other issues that are front and center on our television screens, in our schools, on the streets. But we really do have to hit these issues head on. There's no way around it. Lives are at stake. People's livelihoods are at stake. Prosperity is at stake. And so for me, my book, Know Your Price, I love the book. It's a resource, but it's really a tactic to talk to people in communities. And so reach out if you want me to come to your book club to spark a conversation. But this is about having the kind of community conversations that we should be having. So I want to thank Politics and Prose for kicking this off. We need these conversations regularly if we're going to solve these problems, because this is a community problem, and there are people out there who are part of the problem, but they're also part of the solution, and we need everybody to be in this, and so let's get it. Let's read. Let's build, but let's grow together. Thank you.
Wonderfully said. Thank you very much, Dr. Perry. Good luck to you on your new book, and hopefully we'll be seeing you again soon.
Know Your Price.
Know Your Price. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to PNP Live.